Okay, so we are going to be diving in this morning to this single moment in the life of Jesus that is this pivotal moment where Jesus changes his direction, and as Jesus changes direction, it turns out that the course of human history changes direction. See, a moment can make all the difference. Our lives are defined by moments that we can point back to and say, things were different before and after that, right? This can be something that comes out when I do weddings. I'll meet with the couple. I'm going to do a wedding in a few weeks. I will sit with that couple and I will ask them, how did you guys come to meet? And as part of that, I often will ask, is there a moment that you knew that this was the person for you, right? And usually what the couple will say, young couple will say, no, I'd say it was kind of more gradual for us. But then usually one or the other of them will say, well, for me there was that one time when she decided to move for me, or when he showed up for my family in that moment of need. That's when I knew that this was the one. So these are good, beautiful bonding moments. But of course, our lives are filled with the other type of moments also. Those moments where we get a call that we never wanted to get. It's the type of days where we got all the bad news first and no good news after, right? Those moments that we look back to also. I know that already this year our personal lives have been filled with this whirlwind of wild moments, hospitalizations and award assemblies, breakups and weddings, funerals and pregnancy announcements. This mix of moments. My own self, this last week, it's one of my favorite weeks of the year because this last week I got to go to a gathering where people were talking about the good news of Jesus at a local elementary school here in Dinuba, and then I got to go and do the same thing at the high school, and then I got to go to Fresno State and do the same thing with college kids all in a week, and I love that. Beautiful moments. And there have also been moments I've held people that were crying. Had people say, hey, this isn't working out. So our lives are filled with moments. I'm not sure which moments you've been facing. And this is to say nothing whatsoever of the moments that are impacting our wider world and society at large as we process news. So today, in the midst of so much going on, what we're doing is we're just doing this sort of radical simplification. We are going to zoom in to this one single pivotal moment in Jesus' life. And in watching how he lives into this moment, we are going to draw out 4 questions for our own momentous days. See, our journey begins in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 9. In fact, we've already read the verse. But to this point in the story, this carefully crafted history of Jesus' life, Jesus has been doing the work of God. He has been healing the sick and proclaiming good news to the poor, and the blind are able to see again. And he's revealing all of these incredible things about the insights into God's kingdom. And so all of this good stuff is happening. But the interesting thing is that as this guy named Luke tells the story, it's all been happening in this one very small geographic area. This sort of out in the middle of nowhere, out in the sticks, nobody knows about it type of place called Galilee. But at this moment, Jesus changes the course of his direction, and from this point on, the action is going to begin to ramp up, and the plot is going to begin to thicken all the way through the events of what we call Holy Week, between the time we celebrate Palm Sunday all the way through Resurrection Sunday. For Luke writes this: as the time approached for Jesus to be taken up to heaven, he resolutely set out for Jerusalem. Como se acercaba el tiempo, as the days drew near. Here's the thing to note first, is that Jesus has a very peculiar sense of time. Luke makes it clear that a higher, even divine purpose is directing Jesus' life, that Jesus understands himself to be the leading figure in the plot line of God's work in the world, and he is proceeding with a purpose into the days that are ahead of him. This isn't a throwaway line, I want to just point out. on timing, not for those of us who are living through some times that have been challenging. For anyone here who has had their own sense of time upended recently, perhaps because you have entered a new phase of life. Maybe you're settling into retirement and you have more time on your hands than you thought. Or maybe you are dealing with a difficult diagnosis, so now you have to pace yourself. You have less energy every day, but the same demands of the day. Or others of us, maybe you have someone in your family or your home, you're in the newborn phase, trying to get a baby to sleep. Or you are picking up a second job and you're trying to find out, how do I stay sane with my time spoken for in so many different ways? Well, here's the point. As we try and sync calendars containing birthdays, sick days, and game days, play dates, court dates, and just date dates to get a second with our romantic other, right? Whatever you have going on today, Jesus' way has something to say to it, and especially if you have something difficult today. Which reminds me of one of the greatest stories ever told, The Lord of the Rings. Yes, disclaimer, I'm a huge nerd about that. There's a very profound scene near the beginning of the tale. The reluctant hero-to-be Frodo Baggins has just learned all about what he is up against, the darkness that is coming for him, the danger of his day that, as you know the story, it's largely inherited. He had just this chance encounter that all this has come upon him. He had no choice about it. And so he turns to the wise old wizard Gandalf, and Frodo says, "I wish it need not have happened in my time." Many of us know exactly that feeling. I wish I weren't in this mess. I wish this situation was not part of my kid's childhood. I wish it, whatever it may be for you, I wish it need not have happened in my time. I wish that this was something that my grandparents had overcome, or selfishly some of us think, I wish this was a debt maybe my kids could figure out in the future. But I wish it need not have happened in my time. To which Gandalf replies, "So do I, and so do all who live to see such times." In other words, he's saying we all tend to feel like this, whether you are wise or a fool, whether you're a leader or a follower, whether you're rich or poor, more or less educated. We all feel like this at times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. There's so much wisdom to this observation. Tolkien, as a man of deep faith, is getting at the question that our scripture will prompt us to ask this morning, which is simply this: what is it time for in my life? What is it time for me to do in this unprecedented time of whatever stage of life you find yourself in? What is God calling you toward? And how can you not just get through this time until the time passes, but how can you experience the lesson that God has for you in the midst of it? Well, when Jesus determines it's his time to act, we're told that he set his face to go to Jerusalem. I remember when my boys were really young, they both were talkers pretty fast, but when they were really young, they were at that phase where to communicate, maybe they had a couple go-to words in English or Spanish or whatever, but mostly they would just, come into the room and they'd be like, like gesturing wildly, And if I wanted to see what it was that my son was exploring as he's curious about his world, I'd have to, as a parent, get down to his level and try and see what it is that he's gesturing towards, right? I'd have to follow his gaze to say, yeah, that's a dog, it's okay, that's all right. Or, mijo, that's a flower, how beautiful, right? That's how beautiful the flower is. Or, no, the Roomba's not out to get you, whatever that may be. But here's the thing, this principle that many of us know in working with young kids, it lasts for most of our lives, because throughout our lives, when we care about somebody, we want to see sometimes the way that they see. When they say, I'm really concerned about this, we want to share in their perspective. We want to see what it is that they are caring about and concerned with. And so what we see in this moment, in dramatic fashion, is that Luke portrays a literal turning point in Jesus' life, so that as Jesus pivots to move in a new direction on a different road, like a great film director, Luke has his whole audience, the sort of camera pans toward what it is that Jesus is seeing on the far horizon. As we're told that Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem. Now, to set your face toward something was a Hebrew expression that indicated that you were fixed and determined to do something. It's that moment where you're talking to your friend and you're trying to convince them of something, and maybe they're nodding along with you, but you can tell that your words no longer have any impact, right? Because their mind is made up, right? Your words are of no use. Now, this isn't the same thing as resting face, but it's the idea of you are stuck in a certain way. In fact, hundreds of years before the birth of Christ, the prophet Isaiah had foretold that the coming Messiah, the Savior, the suffering servant, would be one who acted in complete reliance on God, who would say things like this. Part of the phrase is on the screen, but the coming Messiah would say things like this: "Because I know the sovereign Lord helps me, I will not be disgraced. Therefore have I set my face like flint, and I know I will not be put to shame." In an image eerily reminiscent of Jack Black's iconic flint and steel line from the Minecraft movie, Jesus' face is set like flint. He has this steely gaze. That would be another English way to say it. He is fixated on the mission that his Father has laid before him. And the direction that his face is set on is very important. Because when the text tells us that his face is set towards Jerusalem, we have to understand that Jerusalem was not just some random location. It's not just another address in Google Maps. Rather, Jerusalem was the cultural center of Jesus' Jewish world. This is where the temple would be, with the religious establishment. If anybody ever left Galilee, where Jesus has ever been to travel, it would have been to go on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. But it was not just the sort of religious center of the world. It was also where the Roman Empire, who were the ruling empire of this area where Jesus has grown up in, it was where they had set up their sort of political base. And this is where the governor would be, and the soldiers, and the courts, and all of these things. So when Jesus sets his face to go toward Jerusalem, by turning toward it, what he is doing is he is headed straight into the buzzing nest of his most diehard opponents. Because the Bible tells us very clearly that most of the religious and political elite end up being opposed to Jesus' way. So Jesus has set himself to go to this place knowing that he is on a collision course with the injustice of the status quo. Jesus' conviction leads him into conflict with the complacent, the comfortable, and the complicit, and he does so at great cost to himself. This is how Jesus sets his foot onto the road. And this is all the more impressive because the Bible tells us very clearly that Jesus has no illusions about the welcome that awaits him there. He's not there to get a prize. He's not there to be coronated by the people. He has already predicted that the path in front of him will lead through suffering and death. In fact, an expert on this part of the Bible, Joel Green, observes, quote, "This resolve on Jesus' part to go to Jerusalem comes in spite of the fate that awaits him there, or perhaps one might better say because of the fate that awaits him there, since it is through his execution and vindication that he will fulfill God's salvific purpose." See, the story of Easter is not and has never been about how Jesus turned up at the wrong place at the wrong time, got caught off guard, and had a hell of a weekend. That is not the story of Easter. The story of Easter is much more something like the culmination of a deliberate journey of self-sacrificing love where the kingdom of heaven breaks out in a broken world. And it's a journey that Christ calls us all to follow him in. If you're following along in a Bible, whether you have to scroll up or just flip the page, you'll read that in this very chapter, Jesus has told us just a few verses back in verse 23 that whoever wants to be his disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow him. So when we follow Jesus' gaze, when we see where the camera is sweeping, if we zoom in, what do we see? Well, in a very real way, we find ourselves confronted with the cross. That's what Jesus is seeing here. We find Jesus in a moment where he is coming to terms with and facing up to his own death. And that's a very uncomfortable thought, right? Like, I get that we have beautiful flowers here, and I loved being outside for Connecting Point today. But you come in and you really say, well, what is Jesus thinking about today? And it turns out to be death. And that's rather a squeamish thought, isn't it? The French philosopher François de la Rochefoucauld, and I know I nailed that. I'm good in English and French and Spanish, I know. Neither the sun, he says, nor death can be looked at steadily. What's he saying? You look at the sun, what do you want to do? You want to look away. You look at death, what do you want to do? Distract yourself, look away. It's painful to look at either of these things. And yet here we see Jesus facing up to it. He's turning to the cross, to the uncertainty and the suffering and the grief. He enters fully into this most human of experiences. See, this is part of our shared humanity. As one writer put it one time, they said, when we are young, death is fascinating because it seems purely hypothetical, right? So it's fascinating. And when we're older, precisely because it is no longer hypothetical, right? But it fascinates all of us. I reflected on this verse a few years ago, and I remember I was studying this for the first time, and I was thinking about, what do? We catch the vision of Jesus and the cross and this big moment in the Bible. And as I was studying this text, it was all very heavy for me. So I hit up a few of my friends, and I sent them this type of invitation, which you guys don't want to fill out a Connect card because I might text you these sort of weird things. But I was like, hey, I'm going to be preaching on something. Could I get your thoughts on it? And my friends were like, yeah, sure. What is it? And I'm like, mortality. And they're like, oh, great. They're like, you serious, man? I'm like, dead serious. And I thought I got the last word. But then one of them texted me back. He's like, sounds good. See you tomorrow. So I guess I texted the right people. Well, one of the most interesting conversations came with this dude named Ben. And Ben, I met when I was in this national leadership thing, and we roomed together. And so because you room together with people for like a week, you talk like late at night. And he was significantly older than me. And so before he had become a minister, he had been, of all things, a mortician. So I talked to him about this. I was like, hey, Ben, what can you tell me about this verse? I read him the verse, and he told me things like this. He said, Brad, when I worked in the funeral industry, my job was to mask death, to dress it up and make it look pretty, or make it just look like another simple business transaction because people don't like to look at it. We don't like to be reminded of our own mortality. We face it only when we are forced to. But he said, Brad, I see here that Jesus has an intimate understanding of his own death. He's aware that it is coming, and he steps toward it, and that's courage. I talked to another one of my friends who's a poet, and I asked him what he saw in this text, and he said, Brad, here Jesus is moving toward the pain and the brokenness of the world. He's stepping into the tension of unknowing and uncertainty, and that's courage. I think my friends were right to highlight courage here. Maya Angelou tells us, courage is the most important of all the virtues because without courage, you can't practice any other virtue consistently. See, friend, whether your virtue that is the core thing of your life is being truthful or being a peacemaker or being gracious, to practice any of those virtues, you will need courage to keep you being truthful, to keep you being gracious. And I have to tell you, the courage of Jesus just never ceases to move and inspire me in this moment. It even sparks a little bit of bravery in me because I'll be honest, like on my own, like just by personality type, I naturally tend to avoid difficult things. I find it is easier sometimes to leave certain bills in a stack unopened because I'm afraid of how much I might owe, right? There's certain emails where I get an email with a certain title and it's hard for me to open that. There's certain times that I have a pain and I don't necessarily want to go to the doctor to get it checked out because I'm worried about what it might be. Simply put, when I am at a fork in the road, I'm tempted to take the road of least resistance. And I'd wager many of us in this room, when confronted with a challenge, we adopt either the ostrich's pose, right, where you sort of bury your head in the sand and just hope that it goes away, or others of us, when we are caught at a crossroads, we tend to wait and watch where everyone else is going so that we can follow the crowd. But Jesus here shows us another way. And this truly is a road less traveled because it's a way of courage and of self-sacrifice that faces up to what needs to be faced. One poet said this, not everything that is faced can be changed. I like that that's honest. You can face some things and can't figure it out. But, he continues, nothing can be changed until it is faced. Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem, toward the road ahead and the cross that awaited him. So for those of you today who are afraid because of something happening in your world, for those of you who are grieving, for those of you who are face to face with hardship, know that Jesus is present with you. And so whatever it is that you're facing, yes, you have to face it, but you're not facing it alone. Because Jesus set his face to face down death and the grave, we can face what lies on the path ahead of us. That's the beauty of this text. And the implications are very broad. Because Jesus set his face to Jerusalem out of love for us, we can set our faces to our city because of our love for our neighbors. Because Jesus set his face to Jerusalem, we can step away from comfort and towards service. We can step away from indecision and choose to act instead. But this requires one more thing of us. In closing, we see all of this from just one verse on Jesus' life. We see in closing Jesus' resolve. One translation goes like this. The closing of our verse reads this way: Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem. Now, what does resolve mean? Resolve means something like tenacity, perseverance, stick-with-itness, the power to stay the course. See, here's the thing. As you guys know, resolutions are very easy to make, right? If I give you resolve, everyone put resolutions, 5 resolutions, you could post 5 by the time I'm done with this sermon. You post, here's my resolutions. Or better yet, here's the resolutions I think other people should live by and what I think they should do, right? Resolutions are very easy. Living with resolve is very difficult. And here we see Jesus doing just that. As we see Jesus take his first steps of this pilgrimage that he calls us to follow him in, what we quickly realize if we choose to set foot on the path that Jesus has laid for us is that it will take resolve to stay the course. See, the tricky thing about this whole journey theme is that a journey takes time. As anyone who's ever traveled with a child that sits behind you and asks you, are we there yet? Are we there yet, right? It takes time. The other thing about a journey that's extremely inconvenient is it's very hard to go on a journey while sitting on the couch. In other words, you have to actually get up and move. As one comedian puts it, I love this, he says, I love all my beliefs and I live by none of them. Right? That's most of us. We say, I love my beliefs, but don't make me journey. I love my beliefs. I love to post about them, but don't actually, push back or expect me to defend them. Traditionally in a formal debate, when they say you have a debate between people, and maybe it's for, a school or whatever. Traditionally, the opening, you'll say resolved before you say what it is you defend, and then you debate it. And so, in effect, resolve is the thing that you are prepared to voice and defend. And here Jesus' attitude seems to indicate some very powerful opening statements. I think Jesus would say things like this. We see it in his example. Resolved, God my Father can be trusted. Resolved, humility is the way to true greatness. Resolved, revenge is not the way that God's kingdom comes. Resolve, hope will not win out over despair. Resolve, death does not get the last say, my God does. Jesus sets out on the path with resolve. And it takes him all the way through to the good plan that God had for him. Now, the road ahead of us is long. In Luke's biography, Easter has a long introduction, you might say. And we're going to get to see a lot of incredible moments that are on this sort of a road trip. But before we leave the station, at this moment at the outset of the road trip, wherever you are and however you came to find us today, I want to ask you once more these 4 questions. First, is it time for you to do something? If God is prompting you, you should not let fear hold you back. Second, is there something unaddressed in your life that you need to look at, that you need to face up to? Because of Jesus, you don't have to avoid it. Is there some resolution that you actually need to follow through on, where you once said, resolved, Jesus is Lord, resolved, I'm going to live in this way. And now you're like, well. Or finally, the last one, especially if none of the first 3 questions bothered you, are you complacent or complicit with the status quo in an area of life that Jesus' way actually comes into conflict with? Because as we see, the place where Jesus shows up in Jerusalem has lots of people that are very comfortable with their lives. And we're not ready for the kingdom message that Jesus had to say. But because Jesus lived faithfully, this is the good news. Don't lose sight of it. Some of you are so bothered by the questions that you're going to lose sight of it. Don't lose sight of it. Get this thing that I'm about to say and then come back to your question. Because Jesus lived faithfully into this moment in his life, he opened a whole new way for you and I to live faithfully in our moments today. And that's good news.